Hello, my friends, and welcome to FISHTORY. I am Alexander Williamson, your host, as always, and today I'm going to share with you a secret. One of my favorite secrets of where I get the news on fish, and it's a pretty obvious site, I suppose. Fish in the News. Who would have thought that that's where I get my news on brand new fish in the hobby? This particular profile, you can follow it on X/Twitter, or you can follow it on Facebook now, or Blue Planet. Now, what I like is that they do salt and freshwater, but they show a really nice kind of eye-catching photo, usually, of a new fish. So here is a new species in the hobby, and then they will put the hashtag new species alert if it is a new species, and this one happens to be a critically endangered new species in the Northobranchius, and it's a Sylvaticus is the species. Kind of interesting, but they're calling it a relic species from an East African forest refugium in southeastern Kenya. So I'm sure the read on this is going to be really interesting, but if you look here, so they've got, okay, great, there's a new fish, that's interesting enough, and they show a picture of it, but what they also do is they link usually an article, like right here, in Zootaxia, or, the Journal of Ichthyology, someone that is, scientifically vetted and a good source. And they do a great job at what they do. But, I mean, you can go here and you can actually read the whole write-up of the information about the fish. And then here they're going to talk about how the genus existed already. Obviously, it's a big genus of all these killifish, but also how they are from a population, that's disjointed and that was just kind of recently found out of the normal way of where we would expect to find them. But kind of interesting because each new species, obviously, there's an interesting story behind. But I just wanted to show you guys a couple of the new species just to ooh and ah over that they've found recently. And they also do articles on, new discoveries within science related to ichthyology. So here, they've got a new species yet again, and this is a cyprinidae, or a cyprinid, from the Dabi Mountains in Henan province of China. They're finding all sorts of really cool fish there lately, and you're seeing these are probably from last spring, is probably when these were taken, because you can see the tubercles and the little denticles, or the dots there that are like an osteophyte or a hardened calcified, or some sort of bone spur-like texture that's on the fish. And that usually happens in these temperate or subtropical fish. You see it in North America, you see it in Europe, and you see it in Asia quite frequently, especially in the loaches and like things like suckerfish, stone rollers, even some shiners and daces. But really cool, it's an interesting fish to look at, and they've got a couple different color morphs on it there. And then they also talk about the history of the fish, and then the articles, sometimes if they have a little lock on them like this one, they're not open to the public, but they usually do tell you who published it and when it was published, all this sort of thing. And then if you're real clever and annoying like me, you can track down the actual ichthyologist or the university that published it, and usually find a listing for the professors listed, and then beg them to read the article if you really want to. So this is another interesting one because they have seen so many new fish coming from Taiwan, but this is another endemic hill stream loach coming from Taiwan. And along with these, you see these two, which it's probably the male and the female here, in that they are just talking about this Formosinia gilberti. So it's also named after somebody with the last name Gilbert, or maybe the first name Gilbert, I suppose. But what I wanted to show you guys more of was some of the species that we've found just already in 2025, which is quite remarkable. We went over some of the species that they talked about in 2024, and I hope to go over some of the cave-dwelling species and things soon. But look at these weird, strange fish from the Negro, or the Blackwater Basin in the Amazonas province of Brazil. And these are new knife fish, which is really cool. And they're a small knife fish, and it says that they're weakly electric, which is also really fascinating. And what's going on here is actually they have 3 new species that they're publishing on, and you can see that they do vary a little bit in their body style, the coloration, and the placement of, say, their lateral line, as you can see here. And it almost seems that some of these are going to be almost like an extremophile in that they must be in very, very muddy or opaque waters, and they don't really need their eyesight so much as they're using that electrical or electromagnetic field that they use and sense from. Also, you can see that the fin underneath that runs the length of the fish must be what gives them most of their locomotion, and it's kind of interesting how long that is and how long the tail is on this. And if that says 2 centimeters there for the standard length, I mean, we're looking at what, maybe 4 or 5 centimeters, something like that. A pretty small fish. We're talking less than 3 inches altogether, most likely. A pretty small little fish. Now, the other thing that's interesting is they do these features on different biomes and habitats a lot of times, and this one in particular is really interesting in that it talks about all the wood cats and plecos that live in rotten tree trunks, rotten stumps, and specifically this is what is in the Tupi Sustainable Development Reserve in the lower Negro River. And a lot of times you'll see this where you'll see, oh, the last thing was from the Negro River, and here is an article not necessarily even singling out brand new fish, but it's singling out interesting behavior or what's in their stomach, or how they reproduce, or something about the fact if they have a toxin in them, or something about the biology of the fish that's unique. And it makes for an absolutely fascinating read on a lot of these. Like right here, we just went over this. If you want to see that episode, I did a live stream, and starting at about 45 minutes in, we start going over all the meat and potatoes of that report from last year's species. But I mean, they have reported a lot through this, and I mean, pretty interesting too. They go over a lot of the things that are going on in the hobby, like this, which is the first DNA barcoding of Beta uberis. And this is interesting in that a lot of people have said that the small island of Belitung in Indonesia, or in the archipelago of Indonesia, that island is essentially that it all was connected at one point depending on sea levels, and that now it's disjointed, but the fish are the same. And others have been arguing that no, it's been disjointed long enough that the fish are not the same. And so here we have a wild betta species, and they're actually looking at the DNA, and they are finding that yes, these are subpopulations, and some of them, how different are they? And so answering these questions, pretty interesting, and something that I've been following closely on here. Now, another few species I wanted to go over that I just saw recently. These are all just in February. I mean, look at this beautiful little cypriniform. I mean, these are like some sort of little barb, right? And they're very cool. There's clearly a couple kinds here, and this is the Hampala genus. Very cool. A new one out of Thailand. It seems like they just keep finding fish in that Thailand, Myanmar region. But look at that white stripe over the with the black, and then the red in the fins. Just very striking and pretty little fish. Some yellow fins here, probably I'm guessing on a female. Very, very cool. Also, again, in the Yunnan province, you'll see that like in a month, you'll often find a lot of Rio Negro, a lot of Yunnan, a lot of Henan province, China. And that's because these teams go and they do research and they file reports, and then they come back and they work on these things together. And so, like this new loach species, which is going by the Unanolus triangulus, which is an interesting name, probably due to the shape of all the fins, I would guess. I mean, there's kind of triangular paired fins, anal fin, dorsal fin, and pectoral fin. Kind of cool there, though, and, an interesting looking golden little loach. Very cool, and they are just finding so many fish. It blows your mind when you start to realize how many there are. Now, also, this was an interesting article, and I won't go too far into it, but it's about how the origins of this fish were incorrect. So this was thought of as Hyphosobricon scholzii from 1937. But now, since the 70s, we've known another fish from a whole different region as this Hyphosobricon fernandezi, and we thought that they were two separate fish, but it turns out, this is just absolutely fascinating to me, that they were actually the same species, and that back in the 1930s, when people were collecting these fish and bringing them back to Germany, they would drop them off from different expeditions into the lab for the ichthyologists and the taxonomists to then document and preserve. And they would look very carefully and count all the fin rays and count the different features and measure all the different things, like the distance between the mouth and the eye and the top of the head and the nostril and the eye to the gill plate. All these different things and ratios they measure and they keep track of and they publish when they do a taxonomic paper. Well, they'd done all that, and sometimes they vary from location to location a little bit, but they'd done that with this fish. And it turns out that the lab back in the 30s, in 1937 most likely, they actually had these fish, and somebody probably tossed them in a community tank, and basically they got mixed up with another expedition that came in the week after. And literally the people who are then charged with naming them and explaining about them wrote the book on these fish. They published the stuff about these fish using all the wrong location details, and water settings, and all the parameters and things were all completely wrong. And it turns out that these fish were from Lake Valencia, and they live right alongside the diamond tetra, which is interesting because they're one of the few groups of fish that, despite whatever the other fish in their genus are doing, if they live in the Lake Valencia region, they tend to tolerate alkaline water much better than a lot of the black water fish that are found in the Orinoco or in other parts of like northern Brazil and the Guianan Shield. And it turns out that they knew that these were very tolerant of water all the way up to around 8.0 pH, and they always found that that was kind of funny over the years in the hobby. But now they realize, oh, it's because they're from the Lake Valencia region where all the fish are like that. It's not that they're just some really weird exception to the rule that was from some other place. And it turns out that that other place that they were said to be from, nobody ever found them there again. So that should have probably been a tip-off in itself. But how many times has this happened? I mean, how many times do people literally just don't have the right, post-it note saying, hey, we got this at this place, and here are the water parameters, and here's all the details. And then they reach in the tank and, I don't know, they grab a black neon tetra instead of this one. It's easy to see how that could happen if you weren't being very careful. And it's wild to think that all the books published by different ichthyologists, different universities, they all were correct by the book and by the info that was there. But now with DNA and with also being able to do things like analyze the contents of their stomach or even the makeup of their tissue and their flesh, we can analyze like the isotopic ratios of what they were eating and what part of the forest they're from, or if they were eating a certain specialized, insect or fruit or berry, or, if there's something with a unique signature, we can actually trace that back now. And just like these unique water parameter features that we realized they had, it is worth going back now through the archives and kind of looking at those weird ones that kind of are out of place with their abilities or with like their quirks, and checking and seeing, if there could be room for error in the original workup, and if they're still there at the site where they were said to be. So often nobody goes back and follows up, and they just kind of shrug and they say, oh, must have gone extinct there. Alright guys, so I want to show you another couple fish and then I'll get out of here, but this one is just too awesome not to share, and this was from Borneo on the Indonesian side. Very, very cool little miniature loach, right around 1.5 inches long. And I mean, just look at those colors, that like kind of soft bluish gray, and then with the black and the smoky gray. I think these are kind of like your bumblebee goby. They're going to be popular in the hobby. They're not quite here yet, but they will be soon. And I hope they don't over harvest them, because they are cute as a bug and probably, very needed in that niche environment they're from. There's a fun looking tilapia right there. So as I said, there's other papers around that are always useful and interesting that this place publishes. But where I want to leave you is on this fish, which is another one of the fish that I'm going to tease you with. We're going to talk about these cave species, but this is from Guangzhou province of southeastern China. And this is a beautiful cave fish that must be very new to the cave, in that it still has lots of coloration, and it still has, whiskers, large eyes. It still has a lot of sensory organs. It almost looks as though it is a trout, but it is a cypriniform. And this is an underground fish It's a cave fish, and in the big network of caves that were found all over China recently, they're actually connecting a whole bunch of fish that they didn't know were related to one another, and they're finding that this cave system up to 30 million years ago was connected through underground aquifers, tunnels, rivers, and floodwaters, and that these fish are all related in these sinkholes and underground caves in many cases. And that kind of wraps up the concept that we were going to finish on, which is these cave species. And we've got one last one that's from Indonesia. And as far as I know, this is the only cave fish from Indonesia or Java itself. And this is related to like the barb family. It's a Cyprinidae, of course, again, and it's from the Klapunungal, and I probably butchered that, I apologize, but the Klapunungal karst area or limestone cave region in West Java, Indonesia. And again, very, very interesting. Look at that. No eyes whatsoever. So we can guess probably millions of years that was underground. Maybe not. I mean, it could be that it's more recent than that, but generally when they have changed this much, they are a very long-term underground fish without any pigmentation. What's interesting is notice the scales and protection that they still need. So these fish probably have predation, which means that there are various trophic levels feeding down there, which in itself is fascinating. And to think that there's something bigger down there that's probably able to eat these guys, and that they kept their scales for that, or maybe just due to parasites, who knows. But all cool stuff to think about, all cool stuff to check out. I highly recommend you guys come on here and check out this big article about all these cave fish in China. I mean, look at all these species. They just did a big genetic survey of them all, and we'll be talking about that on the channel soon. But I hope you guys have a great day, and if you like this kind of stuff, these kind of deep dives, and a little bit deeper than just saying, oh, look at this fish, it's pretty, it's peaceful, here's how you put it in an aquarium, come check out the channel, support the channel, join us on Discord, join us on Facebook, or in the members chats and comments on actual YouTube. We're always into something, up to something, and all of my sources and papers like this I post on Discord, and I try to get them cracked and unlocked for you guys so we can all read them, because I think that education and knowledge should be available to those who want it for the lowest price possible. So good to see you guys. Thanks as always. Hit that thumbs up, share with a friend who'd enjoy it, and have a great Friday.